that direction. We had plotted these reports, the ones from Boston and the one from Fort Monmouth, on a map, and without injecting any imagination or wild assumptions, it looked as if two somethings had come down across Boston on a southwesterly heading, crossed Long Island, hovered for a few minutes over the Army's secret laboratories at Fort Monmouth, then proceeded toward Washington. In a way, we half expected to get a report from Washington. Our expectations were rewarded, because in a few hours a report arrived from that city. A physics professor at George Washington University reported a dull, gray, smoky-colored object which hovered north-northwest of Washington for about 8 minutes. Every once in a while, the professor reported, it would move through an arc of about 15 degrees to the right or left, but it always returned to its original position. While he was watching the UFO, he took a 25-cent piece out of his pocket and held it at arm's length so that he could compare its size to that of the UFO. The UFO was about half the diameter of the quarter. When he first saw the UFO, it was about 30 to 40 degrees above the horizon. But during the 8 minutes it was in sight, it steadily dropped lower and lower until buildings in downtown Washington blocked off the view. Besides being an unknown, this report was exceptionally interesting to us because the sighting was made from the center of downtown Washington, D.C. The professor reported that he had noticed the UFO when he saw people all along the street looking up in the air and pointing. He estimated that at least 500 people were looking at it, yet this was the only report we received. This seemed to substantiate our theory that people are the Air Force. But they evidently do tell the newspapers, because later on we picked up a short account of the sighting in the Washington papers. It merely said that hundreds of calls had been received from people reporting a UFO. When reports were pouring in at the rate of 20 or 30 a day, we were glad that people were hesitant to report UFOs. But when we were trying to find the answer to a really naughty sighting, we always wished that more people had reported it. The old adage of having your cake and eating it too held even for the UFO. Technically, no one in Washington, besides, of course, Major General Samford and his superiors, had anything to do with making policy decisions about the operation of Project Blue Book or the handling of the UFO situation in general. Nevertheless, everyone was trying to get into the act. The split in opinions on what to do about the rising tide of UFO reports, the split that first came out in the open at General Samford's briefing, was widening every day. One group was getting dead serious about the situation. They thought we now had plenty of evidence to back up an official statement that the UFOs were something real and, to be specific, not something from this Earth. This group wanted Project Blue Book to quit spending time investigating reports from the standpoint of trying to determine if the observer of a UFO had actually seen something foreign to our knowledge, and start assuming that he or she had. They wanted me to aim my investigation at trying to find out more about the UFO. Along with this switch in operating policy, they wanted to clamp down on the release of information. They thought that the security classification of the project should go up to top secret until we had all of the answers. Then the information should be released to the public. The investigation of UFOs along these lines should be a maximum effort, they thought, and their plans called for lining up many top scientists to devote their full time to the project. Someone once said that enthusiasm is infectious, and he was right. The enthusiasm of this group took a firm hold in the Pentagon, at Air Defense Command Headquarters, on the Research and Development Board, and many other agencies throughout the government. But General Samford was still giving the orders, and he said to continue to operate just as we had, keeping an open mind to any ideas. After the minor flurry of reports on July 1st, we had a short breathing spell and found time to clean up a sizable backlog of reports. People were still seeing UFOs, but the frequency of the sighting curve was dropping steadily. During the first few days of July, we were getting only 2 or 3 good reports a day. On July 5th, the crew of a non-scheduled airliner made page 2 of many newspapers by reporting a UFO over the AEC's super-secret Hanford, Washington installation. It was a skyhook balloon. On the 12th, a huge meteor sliced across Indiana, southern Illinois, and Missouri that netted us 20 or 30 reports. Even before they had stopped coming in, we had confirmation from our astronomer that the UFO was a meteor. But 42 minutes later, there was a sighting in Chicago that wasn't so easily explained. According to our weather records, on the night of July 12th, it was hot in Chicago. At 9:42, there were at least 400 people at Montrose Beach trying to beat the heat. Many of them were lying down looking at the stars so that they saw the UFO as it came in from the west-northwest, made a 180-degree turn directly over their heads, and disappeared over the horizon. It was a large red light with small white lights on the side, most of the people reported. Some of them said that it changed to a single yellow light as it made its turn. It was in sight about 5 minutes, and during this time, no one reported hearing any sound. One of the people at the beach was the weather officer from O'Hare International Airport, an Air Force captain. He immediately called O'Hare. They checked on balloon flights and with radar, but both were negative. Radar said that there had been no aircraft in the area of Montrose Beach for several hours. I sent an investigator to Chicago, and although he came back with a lot of data on the sighting, it didn't add up to be anything known. The next day, Dayton had its first UFO sighting in a long time when a Mr. Roy T. Ellis, president of the Rubber Seal Products Company, and many other people reported a teardrop-shaped object that hovered over Dayton for several minutes, about midnight. This sighting had an interesting twist because 2 years later, I was in Dayton and stopped in at ATIC to see a friend who was one of the technical advisors at the center. Naturally, the conversation got around to the subject of UFOs, and he asked me if I remembered this specific sighting. I did, so he went on to say that he and his wife had seen this UFO that night, but they had never told anybody. He was very serious when he admitted that he had no idea what it could have been. Now, I'd heard this statement 1,000 times before from other people, but coming from this person, it was really something because he was as anti-saucer as anyone I knew. Then he added, "From that time on, I didn't think your saucer reporters were as crazy as I used to think they were." The Dayton sighting also created quite a stir in the press. In conjunction with the sighting, the Dayton Daily Journal had interviewed Colonel Richard H. McGee, the Dayton Oakwood Civil Defense Director. They wanted to know what he thought about the UFOs. News. "There's something flying around in our skies, and we wish we knew what it was." When the story broke in other papers, the colonel's affiliation with civil defense wasn't mentioned, and he became merely a colonel from Dayton. Dayton was quickly construed by the public to mean Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and specifically ATIC. Some people in the Pentagon screamed, while others gleefully clapped their hands. The gleeful hand claps were from those people who wanted the UFOs to be socially recognized, and they believed that if they couldn't talk their ideas into being, they might be able to force them in with the help of this type of publicity. The temporary lull in reporting that Project Blue Book had experienced in early July proved to be only the calm before the storm. By mid-July, we were getting about 20 reports a day, plus frantic calls from intelligence officers all over the United States, as every Air Force installation in the U.S. was being swamped with reports. We told the intelligence officers to send in the ones that sounded the best. The buildup in UFO reports wasn't limited to the United States. Every day we would receive reports from our air attachés in other countries. England and France led the field, with the South American countries running a close third. Needless to say, we didn't investigate or evaluate foreign reports because we had our hands full right at home. Most of us were putting in 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. It wasn't at all uncommon for Lieutenant Andy Flews, Bob Olson, or Kerry Rothstein, my investigators, to get their sleep on an airliner going out or coming back from an investigation. TWA airliners out of Dayton were more like home than home. But we hadn't seen anything yet. All the reports that were coming in were good ones with no answers. Unknowns were running about 40%. Rumors persist that in mid-July 1952, the Air Force was braced for an expected invasion by flying saucers. Had these rumor mongers been at ATIC in mid-July, they would have thought that the invasion was already in full swing. And they would have thought that one of the beachheads for the invasion was Patrick Air Force Base, the Air Force's guided missile long-range proving ground on the east coast of Florida. On the night of July 18th at 10:45, 2 officers were standing in front of base operations at Patrick when they noticed a light at about a 45-degree angle from the horizon and off to the west. It was an amber color and quite a bit brighter than a star. Both officers had heard flying saucer stories, and both thought the light was a balloon. But to be comedians, they called to several more officers and airmen inside the operations office and told them to come out and see the flying saucer. The people came out and looked. A few were surprised and took the mysterious light seriously, at the expense of considerable laughter from the rest of the group. The discussion about the light grew livelier, and bets that it was a balloon were placed. In the meantime, the light had drifted over the base, had stopped for about a minute, turned, and was now heading north. To settle the bet, one of the officers stepped into the base weather office to find out about the balloon. Yes, one was in the air and being tracked by radar, he was told. The weather officer said that he would call to find out exactly where it was. He called and found out that the weather balloon was being tracked due west of the base, and that the light had gone out about 10 minutes before. The officer went back outside to find that what was first thought to be a balloon was now straight north of the field and still lighted. To add to the confusion, a second amber light had appeared in the west, about 20 degrees lower than where the first one was initially seen, and it was also heading north, but at a much greater speed. In a few seconds, the first light stopped and started moving back south over the base. While the group of officers and airmen were watching the 2 lights, the people from the weather office